Chief Officers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, may I, on behalf of the Chief Officer of the Hampshire Fire Brigade, Mr. John Pearson, welcome you to these headquarters and to this Recruits Passing Out Parade. I would like to extend a special welcome to the visiting officers whose recruits are passing out this afternoon, and to all the families and friends of the men on parade today, many who have had to travel long distances to be here. Today we are privileged to have Her Majesty's Inspector of Fire Services, Mr. Dennis Robbins, holder of the Queen's Fire Service Medal and Fellow of the Institution of Fire Engineers, reviewing our parade. Mr. Robbins will be accompanied on his inspection of the recruits by Hampshire Fire Brigade's Chief Fire Officer, Mr. John Pearson. Mr. Robbins and Mr. Pearson have now entered the parade ground to our left. They are now being met by Divisional Officer White, the Commandant of the Training Centre. Divisional Officer White, who is the officer in charge of today's parade, will now escort Mr. Robbins and the Chief Officer across to inspect the recruits. There are 23 recruits passing out today. They are from left to right. In the front row, Fireman Reynolds from Hereford and Worcester Fire Brigade, Fireman Jones from Gloucestershire Fire and Rescue Service, Fireman Fox from Hereford and Worcester Fire Brigade, Fireman Kilpatrick from Royal Berkshire Fire and Rescue Service, Fireman Elliker from Hampshire Fire Brigade, Fireman Bainham from Hampshire Fire Brigade, Fireman Collington from Royal Berkshire Fire and Rescue Service, and Fireman Wilmot from the Royal Berkshire Fire and Rescue Service. In the second row, there are Fireman Scott from Royal Berkshire Fire and Rescue Service. And I'm glad to see he's brought some fans with him. Fireman O'Halloran from the Royal Berkshire Fire and Rescue Service. Fireman Conroy from West Sussex Fire Brigade. Fireman Hornibrook from Gloucestershire Fire and Rescue Service. Fireman Cardozo from the Royal Berkshire Fire and Rescue Service. Fireman Street from West Sussex Fire Brigade, and Fireman Hamilton from Guernsey Fire Brigade. In the third row, we have Fireman McKillop from the Royal Berkshire Fire and Rescue Service, Fireman Hewitt from Hampshire Fire Brigade, Fireman Nairn from Dorset Fire Brigade, Fireman Devereux from Royal Berkshire Fire and Rescue Service, Fireman Brand from Royal Berkshire Fire and Rescue Service, Fireman Brown from the Dorset Fire Brigade, Fireman McGeorge from Hampshire Fire Brigade, and last but not least, Fireman Edwards from the Hampshire Fire Brigade. I'm pleased to say that this is one of the rare occasions where I've had a crowd that are actually cheering. So I hope that when we come to parts of the drill later on this afternoon, I can also call on you for your support for the recruits that are in front of us. Thank you. Also on parade with the recruits are Sub-Officer Woods and Sub-Officer James, two of the 10 general instructors attached to the Brigade Training Centre here at Eastleigh, along with Station Officer Jack, the senior instructor at the centre. While the review takes place, I would like to take this opportunity to tell you a little about the reviewing officer. Her Majesty's Inspector, Mr. Robbins, joined the fire service in London in 1953 at the age of 21 years. In 1957, he transferred to Hertfordshire, still in the rank of fireman, but by 1964 had attained the rank of station officer. In 1965, he joined Worcester City as an assistant divisional officer, and in 1966 transferred to Dorset as a divisional officer. In 1968, Her Majesty's Inspector Mr. Robbins joined East Sussex Fire Brigade, where he rose through the ranks to Deputy Chief Officer. In 1978, he was made Chief Fire Officer of Wiltshire Fire Brigade, where he remained until 1986, when he took up appointment as one of Her Majesty's Inspectors of Fire Services employed by the Home Office. Mr. Robbins is now based in Swindon and is responsible for an area that covers the whole of the south of England, including London and the Channel Islands. As I mentioned earlier, Mr. Robbins is the holder of the Queen's Fire Service Medal and is a Fellow of the Institution of Fire Engineers, an organisation of which he was President in 1984. He is married and has one son and one daughter.